Hello and welcome. If you haven't already, I invite you to please click subscribe. There's no obligation, and it allows you to be notified of all new chapters. Additional information about the story, including the author, chapter warnings, and rating, can be found in the description below. All credit goes to the original author. All That Remains by Orphan Account, Chapter 7. He is Awake. Third Age, 2711, 300 years ago. Adar, Aglar said, you do not need to attend this meeting. I could go in your place. Thranduil looked down from his seat atop his horse, considering his son's offer. It was barely dawn, and he, Barhad, Baraneth, Tolui, and a patrol of warriors were going to Lothlorien. The Elven King, along with Gandalf, Elrond, and Saruman, had been summoned by Lady Galadriel to a council meeting to discuss the growing darkness. For a couple years, Thranduil had believed the shadow was actually receding, when Dol Guldur somehow lost much of its evil aura. The Mirkwood warriors had managed to regain some of the land across the river for a time. The forest and fortress had not been weakened for long, however, and the elves had been quickly pushed back where they had begun. The meeting was necessary, but Thranduil found himself reluctant to go. This would be his first meeting with Galadriel and Celeborn since Luaneth's funeral, and he had not seen Elrond for almost 200 years either. Right after Legolas's capture, the Elf Lord had offered to assist the Elven King's forces in their search for the youngest prince. Elrond knew all too well what orcs were capable of. He had lost his wife, Celebrian, to the monsters, not through death, but a loss of her ability to enjoy life. She had managed to stay in Middle-earth for only a few months before departing to the Undying Lands. Arwen had left for Lothlorien soon after that. Thranduil had been a comforting friend to Elrond, his children being the same for the Lord's twin sons, but none of the royal family had fully understood what the half-elves had been feeling. Back then, the Elven King had refused his friend's offer. It was too dangerous for the warriors of Rivendell to travel so close to Dol Guldur. They were far from incompetent, but in Mirkwood's dark woods, it was necessary to know the land well, or risk walking into a trap. The search for the lost prince could easily turn into rescue attempts for allies that stumbled into spiders' nests. Thranduil did not want Elrond to lose warriors to the darkness. The two elven leaders kept contact throughout the years, but the ever-darkening forest made traveling between their two realms unwise. More and more trees were becoming shadowed, openly attacking elves that were ill-prepared on the road. It was best for outsiders to keep out. Elves would be welcomed if they made it through the forest, but other races, not so much. The Elven King's already wary tolerance of men and other races had all but diminished after the orc captain told him of Legolas's death and cruel men's part in it. If the trees, orcs, and spiders did not kill any intruders that were not allies, the elves would be sure to find them and deal with them, though capture, exile, or death depended on who dared to come to Mirkwood, and their actions within the forest. Thranduil still traded with the men of Lake Town, and accepted any rangers who came by, of course, but if a non-elven person came from the south, from the direction of Dol Guldur, and their motives were any bit questionable. The Elven King shook himself, breaking out of his thoughts to answer his son. No, I must go. You are perfectly capable of running things while I am gone. The Crown Prince hesitated a moment before he reluctantly nodded. Have a safe journey, Adar. With that, the Elven King, royal twins, advisor, and their guards rode away. 9 people, 7 elves and 2 wizards, sat around a large open council chamber that was formed among the golden trees of Lothlorien. Chairs were carved out of the wood, looking as if they had naturally grown there, The participants in this meeting were Thranduil, Tolui, Elrond, Glorfindel, Eristor, Gandalf, Galadriel, Celeborn, and Saruman. "We are gathered here to discuss the growing darkness," Gandalf began. All looked at the gray-robed wizard, expressions ranging from seriousness to concern on their faces. "What darkness do you speak of?" Saruman said. "I see no darkness here." Without a thought, Thranduil was on his feet, eyes blazing with rage as he glared at the white wizard. "What darkness? What darkness? My people are fighting and dying against the darkness. My son and wife were killed by it. And you have the gall to ask, what darkness?" The Elven King could feel Elrond's restraining hand on his shoulder, but ignored it. He was shaking with anger and grief, though rage was Asinda's forefront emotion. He was almost face to face with Curunir, barely noticing as the powerful Istar's hand tightened around his staff. "Calm yourself, Thranduil," Galadriel's voice spoke softly in his mind. "You know of Curunir's ways." Indeed he did. Truthfully, Lucinda did not fully trust the White Wizard. He never had, now that he thought about it. Radagast was eccentric, and in love with the forest, almost like a friendly neighbor. He helped the elves fight the shadow over Mirkwood, doing little things and warning them if any spiders or orcs were doing something shady that the elves were unaware of. Thranduil knew that Aiwendil was not the most powerful of wizards, but was grateful he helped where he could. Oddly enough, the brown wizard had become a lot more informative and determined to assist them in the past 28 years? Ever since Fael fell in the river and was found by Radagast, now that the Elven King thought about it. Gandalf, meanwhile, was a close friend. He did not take much part in Mirkwood's fight against the darkness, but Lucinda knew that Mithrandir's duties lay elsewhere. Out of the three Istar, Gandalf was the most involved in the fight against Sauron. He was the one who searched for signs of the Dark Lord's return. He was the wizard that seemed to be the most spread out and dedicated, yet still finding time to stop by and say hello to old friends. The Elven King's only problem was with Curunir. The White Wizard wanted power. He wanted the free people to be brought under his rule, though he was hesitant to openly go against the will of the Valar. Thranduil could see Saruman's desire for power, hidden beneath the guise of wisdom. The Elven King could tell that Gandalf could not fully see his leader's greed, but did know that Curunir's motives may not all be good. Galadriel, Celeborn, Elrond, and now Thranduil were fully aware of the White Wizard's plans. It was not like they would do anything, however. Saruman held no power over elves, and had no influence in their lands. His plots would not affect them. As such, they would keep their respectful distance from each other. They had been doing that for a while, only meeting when the White Council was called upon. The Elven King was not a part of the council. He had not come within miles of Saruman in a long while. Now he remembered why he tended to avoid the Istar. Out of all the elven lords and kings, Thranduil was the most stubborn and attached to Middle-earth. He and his people cared for the land more than their kin who longed for the sea. As such, Saruman's questionable plots would not be ignored by him. If he could, he would call Curunir out and reveal him openly, but Galadriel did not want that. He could sense it. Why not? Curunir may have strayed from his path, but he still has a part to play in this story, the Lady of Light said in his mind. We cannot antagonize him now. He is still an ally. Your definition of ally greatly differs from mine, Thranduil thought, still glaring furiously at Saruman. Why don't we warn Gandalf at least? Mithrandir must keep Curunir's trust. For now, Galadriel told him mysteriously. Knowing he was going to get no more answers from her, Thranduil backed off the slightest bit from Saruman, glare still in place. He returned to his seat, Elrond sitting beside him. The White Wizard's hand relaxed on his staff. Thranduil idly wondered how Gandalf would have reacted if Saruman had decided to use it. "I apologize, Elven King," Saruman said stiffly. "I meant no offense." Liar, Thranduil thought. "Of course not," he managed to choke out. "Have you been able to discover the source, Mithrandir?" Glorfindel questioned, moving the meeting along rather than reacting to the tension between two of its members. "No," Gandalf stated. "Mordor is still silent. The Witch King remains in Minas Morgul. His lieutenant is in charge of Dol Guldur. The shadow is growing stronger, and I fear it will not be long until Sauron begins to return to the physical world. He can communicate with his ringwraiths, but that is all." "But how much longer will that last?" Elrond questioned. "Sauron will return. The only question is how powerful and influential he will be once he does." "As long as the One Ring remains lost, Sauron will never reach full power," Celeborn said. "However, the growing shadow is a great threat, even without the Dark Lord." "How do you propose we deal with the darkness?" Tolui asked. "What else can we do that is not already being done?" "I do not know," Gandalf admitted. "With the threat of Sauron hanging over our heads, any victories we make against the darkness will be meaningless. As Elrond said, Sauron will return, and until he does, the shadow will continue to grow. The darkness cannot be defeated until the time is right, and Elendil's heir retakes the throne of Gondor." "Then we must do what we have always done," Thranduil said. "We must fight and survive." "Why did I even come to this gathering?" he thought, looking around. "There will be no help for my people from anyone here. Elrond would offer if I asked, I know, but I cannot accept his aid. I will not accept. The shadow in Mirkwood is Mirkwood's problem, and we must fight as we always have, alone." The meeting went on. Bereneth, second daughter of the Elven King, sat stiffly in a chair in one of the large trees of Lothlorien. She was not comfortable here, in the peace and grace of the lady's home. She should be at home, fighting for her realm, not stuck around waiting while her father attended a very important meeting. If Barhad had not wished to go to Lothlorien, the younger twin would not be here at all. Ever since the ride that ended with the discovery of Legolas's death, Bereneth had stuck to her brother's side whenever he left the safety of the palace. Yes, he was the older twin. Yes, he was an adult. Yes, he could take care of himself. But the last time he had gone out without her, he had been in a battle he should not have fought in, and he had found out their little brother was tortured to death. Bereneth had heard from her father what had transpired during the unexpected fight. If the Elven King had not managed to get out of his depression and stupor, Barhad would have died. Bereneth had already lost one brother. She could not bear to lose another, especially her twin. Which was why she was standing there, ill at ease, beneath the pretty golden trees of Lothlorien. In her plain green warrior robes and leather armor, she felt out of place. This was a place of peace, beauty, light, and joy. She did not like it here. It was too peaceful, too joyful, too light. Why did this place thrive while her home suffered? How could it remain unchanged while Mirkwood grew darker every day? As a princess of Mirkwood, Bereneth knew what was preserving Lothlorien, but it still was not fair. As she thought about it, she felt a flicker of pride. Out of the 3 elven realms, 2 were protected by a ring of power. Mirkwood persevered through its inhabitants' wills alone. Perhaps we are stronger than they are, Bereneth thought grimly, almost bitterly. We adapt and love this land, while they remain unchanged and long for the sea. She stopped this line of thought in its tracks, chiding herself. Stop that. It is petty to be jealous of them for being untouched by darkness. That is the reason we fight in the end. To protect Middle-earth, so not all of it is overcome by shadow. Deep down, the Eleth knew she was not envious of Lothlorien's peace, ignorance, and light. She did not feel like the Golden Woods and its elves were abandoning her people, or letting them fight the darkness while they lived in peace. There was only one person in Lothlorien she was angry at, a single person who had abandoned everything for this realm. She had abandoned her family, friends, culture, and love for Middle-earth in exchange for a new family, culture, and a distant longing for the sea. Baroneth? The younger twin closed her eyes, not facing the speaker for a moment. Putting on her best diplomatic face, she looked up. Standing there was the last person she wanted to see. The person she had had a grudge against for almost 200 years, ever since their brother was captured. Hanel, Baroneth said tightly. Her sister stood there in a flowing silver dress, golden hair shining. She was still delicate-looking and calm, the motherly, warm look staying in her eyes. When Baroneth was an elfling, Hanel was always the one she would go to if Luaneth was not in the palace. The oldest princess was the second mother of all of Thranduil and Luaneth's children, even to Aglar. At least, she used to be, until Luaneth died. If Hanel sensed her younger sister's hostility, she did not show it. She sat down next to Baroneth in the empty chair. "It is good to see you," the oldest princess said in her soft, lilting voice. "It has been a long time." She was acting as if their last meeting had not ended with an argument. Her dismissal of the past made Baroneth want to slug her. Rather than respond with something very un-princess-like, the younger sister kept her silence. Luaneth looked at her with blue eyes that were the exact same shade as her father's. However, Hanel's eyes showed only their mother's kindness instead of their father's strength. The anger simmering in Baroneth's chest strengthened as she studied her sister. There was no grief in her posture, face, or eyes. There was no sadness or anger there either. There never had been, not even when their mother was newly dead. Did she not care at all? "I did not even know you were here until Barad told me," Hanel continued, ignorant to her sister's rising ire. "I'd almost think you were ignoring me." If Baroneth did not know any better, she would swear that Hanel was trying to goad her into a fist fight. Hanel did not goad and did not fight. At least, she did not fight physically. Debates were one of her pastimes, unlike Baroneth, who preferred to just stab things with her sword. Hanel was waiting for her to respond, graceful and glowing as she sat beneath the trees, just like everything else in this forest. "You really adopted to the Noldor lifestyle, didn't you?" Baroneth said coldly before she could stop herself. "So much that you didn't come." Hanel blinked, brow furrowing with confusion. "Excuse me?" Baroneth exploded. She leapt to her feet, chair crashing down beside her. "You didn't come to Legolas's funeral," she screamed in her sister's face. "Do you care so little that you couldn't be bothered to say goodbye?" Hanel's blue eyes were wide, shock etched into her expression. "What? We needed you," the younger princess continued to shout. "We all needed you, but you weren't there. You left us." The older princess was quiet, looking down at her folded hands for the longest time. Baroneth glared at her, waiting. How would her sister react? With cold aloofness? Quiet anger? Most likely she would lecture Baroneth about shouting and disturbing the peace of Lothlorien when she was an honored guest. When the oldest princess finally looked up, Baraneth did a double take, the remainder of her anger dying before it could be voiced. Gentle, calm, collected, emotionless, uncaring Hanel was crying. "You're right," Hanel whispered, tears trickling down her cheeks. "I did leave you. I didn't help to try and find Legolas. I left my birthplace to go somewhere better off. I made a new family with my husband and the people here, but I abandoned my family in the process." She covered her face with her hands. "I abandoned you and Ada and our brothers when we needed to be together. I left you on your own when we could have helped each other with our grief. Instead, I ran back to Lothlorien. I was never strong. I was never aloof. I always cared, I just couldn't show it. I had to pretend to be the strong one. I had to try to keep things normal. But when you said I was not grieving, there were already too many memories of Mirkwood, and I couldn't handle it. So I left, without returning or saying goodbye, and..." She began to hiccup, struggling to speak through her sobs. "The next time I heard from my family, it was a letter saying my littlest brother is dead, and I was too much of a coward to return to Mirkwood, even to attend his funeral. I was so afraid that you would all reject me, that you would accuse me of not caring again. Luaneth was my mother, and Legolas my brother. How could you say that I didn't care, and claim I still don't care? They were my family." The younger sister watched her elder weep. Then, slowly, she set the chair upright once more and sat beside Hanel, wrapping her arms around her and bringing her into a hug. "I never really thought that you were unaffected by grief," Baraneth said. "I was never really angry at you. I was angry at the world, and jealous that you could be so normal and strong when the rest of us struggled with grief. It hurts me that you did not trust me or any of us enough to tell us you were grieving and needed help just as much as the rest of us. You're my sister, and I love you. I'll always be there for you, no matter what." Hanel smiled through her tears, now shedding tears of joy. "That means a lot to me, Bear," she said, using the nickname the younger sister had not been called in a long time. "Thank you." "So," Baraneth said awkwardly, struggling to think of a new topic to address. "Are you and Lakhan planning on having a child?" Hanel looked at the ground. When she spoke, her voice was choked. "My husband and I cannot have an elfling." The younger sister froze, guilt and shock overcoming her. I'm sorry." "You misunderstand," Hanel said quickly, though her voice remained sad. "We cannot have an elfling here, on Middle-earth. No elves can anymore." Baraneth remembered her lessons and shut her eyes, shaking her head. "No elflings will be born when the shadow is too strong. I never really noticed that there weren't any elflings running around the city, not since Legolas." She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together to hold back the grief. The two sat in silence for a long time, simply watching the forest. "He was the last, you know," Hanel said quietly. When her sister gave her a questioning look, she explained. "Legolas. He was the last elfling born in Middle-earth." "When the shadow is defeated, the time of the elves really will end, won't they?" Baraneth murmured. "Yes," Hanel said sadly. The younger sister peered at the older, surprised by her sister's tone. "You sound like you don't want to leave." "I don't," Hanel admitted. "Not yet. I may have left Mirkwood, but I still love the trees. When the elves' time is truly over, I will sail." but I'm not ready to leave Middle-earth now." Baroness smiled back at her, relaxing fully for the first time since her sister had arrived. Perhaps she had judged Hanel too harshly. The two Eleth talked for a long time, the hours passing by unnoticed as the sisters reforged the bond that had been broken so long ago. The darkness was annoyed. Its master had left again, and it was not pleased. The separation was not as crippling as the one experienced in Dol Guldur, but it still hurt and weakened the darkness. The darkness hated being weak. It stretched out from its home in Minas Morgul, straining to find its master, but it was too far away for it to reach. Irritation became anger, and if anyone had been around Minas Morgul, they would have seen the tower shudder and shake in reaction to the darkness's rage. Furious and reckless, the darkness stretched further, savagely seeking for any other darkness, any evil that could sustain it. It would not lose itself. It would not let the shadows it cast fail. Further and further it stretched, pushing, digging, seeking all around for a darkness it could latch onto. Then, the darkness felt it. It was distant, tiny and small, almost like it did not exist in this world. But the darkness could sense it. It was another darkness. The darkness was pleased. It had found a new master. Minas Morgul's darkness attempted to touch the other darkness, only to find it blocked. Anger reaching its peak, how dare anything keep it from its master? The darkness slammed into the strange shield that surrounded this other darkness. It bashed against it, raged against it, slamming into it again and again with all of its strength. Something shifted, something cracked, and the darkness shuddered as the thing containing the other darkness broke. A single hairline fracture forming in the strange shield that had tried to hide this darkness. The darkness of Minas Morgul reached out, touching the other distant darkness. Instantly, power rose within the darkness, the other darkness feeding the entity that had found it. There was power, so much power, and the darkness could not stop, reaching further, wanting more. And the other darkness awoke. Far away in Lothlorien, the day after the gathering, Galadriel was watching Thranduil's party ride away, Haldir at her side. The Lady of the Light sighed deeply as she watched the proud Elven King. "I pray your heart can heal, Melanin." She turned away, walking towards the door. She halted when she noticed the March Warden was not following her. "Haldir?" The elf still stood by the window, body rigid and stiff. His fists were clenched at his sides, his eyes were closed, and he did not turn from the window. Concerned, Galadriel walked back to him. "Haldir?" He did not respond. More than a little alarmed, Galadriel tried to touch his mind, flinching as she hit a wall made of odd golden mist and fog. What is this? Before she could attempt to find out, the March Warden's eyes snapped open, gaze distant and blank. "He is awake," he whispered, voice rasping and soft. Galadriel looked at him sharply. "What?" Haldir blinked, swaying a moment, before his eyes focused. "I apologize, my lady. I must have dozed off. Did you say something?" "What did you just say?" the lady repeated. Haldir looked at her with open confusion on his face. "I didn't say anything." Gently, Galadriel touched his mind again, and this time his thoughts were confused, open, and all Haldir. "Something strange has happened here," she murmured ominously, gaining a wary look from her warrior. Leaving the confused march warden behind, she descended the steps, hurrying to her mirror with urgent grace. Slowly, she poured water into the bowl, gazing down as she searched for answers. She saw no visions of the future, present, or past. She saw no images of things that might come. Instead, there was nothing. There was nothing but darkness.